Hello and welcome. My name is Eitan Suez, Technical Marketing Manager at Solo.io. In this lesson, I walk you through a feature on kgateway known as route delegation. What is route delegation? It's a powerful feature of kgateway that supports multi-tenancy and the self-servicing of routes by individual API teams. Route delegation is a custom feature in kgateway. That is to say, it's not part of the Kubernetes Gateway API, but it extends it or builds on it in a very elegant way, we might say. Let's explore further. So if we look at the Gateway API model, right, we can, just as a quick review, we can say that we can imagine requests arriving at a gateway, that we have routing rules that evaluate the request. Now what's interesting is we specify those routing rules in a separate resource from the gateway resource, which is more concerned about ports and protocols, for example. And that routes ultimately direct requests to backend services. And you see that clearly in this illustration, gateway to route to service. So if we look at that sort of relationship here, gateway to route to service, is an interesting one in that the route delegation is introducing a little bit of a twist here into the model. It allows a route to delegate to another route before ultimately reaching a service, and that adds a certain measure of flexibility. So if we look at an example, I should say that when you create a hierarchy of routes like this, we can call, say, the first route in the chain as a parent route and the second one as a child, for example. So if we look at a parent route, an example of one, what specifically stands out in this particular example, this HTTP route, which is in every other respect, just like many other HTTP routes we've looked at before, the backend ref type is another route. Usually it's a service, or kgateway also offers a backend as a sort of a proxy for maybe some remote workload or something residing outside of Kubernetes. But in this case, with route delegation, we can specify a backend ref to be an HTTP route, which is interesting. And what this actually says is that essentially we apportion all incoming requests based on match conditions and delegate them to further route resources that reside in separate namespaces. So this is the curious thing about this route when using route delegation, is the backend ref is not of type service, it's of type HTTP route. And what that affords is the introduction of intermediate routing rules that ultimately route the request to the backend service. Now, why do we do that? It gives us increased flexibility, right? We can define in the parent route any sort of common parameters, and also maybe parameters that cannot be changed by child routes. But then we leave it open for extension. We delegate to teams who define the child routes, the specifics of how to route requests to their back-end services, the ones that they maintain, and that gives them increased autonomy without the burden of having to even be concerned with certain aspects of the route that maybe is not even their responsibility, such as which gateway to attach to, for example. One can look at route delegation as a means of doing refactoring. By refactoring, I mean the elimination of duplication and the more simple management or maintenance of our routing configurations. So we can specify common elements in a parent route that don't need to be repeated in a child route. And we're also not restricted to putting all of our routing rules in a single large file. We can actually sort of split it up and sort of apportion child routes to different teams who then maintain their own rules without having to concern themselves with conflicts or editing files that concern other parties. So what are we going to do? Let's play with this feature in order to really understand how it functions. We're going to use the book info sample application as sort of our test bed in a sandbox, and specifically the two services reviews and details. So we're going to explore a fictitious example whereby we want to expose both of these API endpoints through a gateway. And we'll define a parent route and two child routes. We'll do some setup, provision a gateway, and deploy those services, and then configure the route delegation and see it in action. So without further ado, let us step into our environment here. and we'll begin by provision a gateway. Now, this is familiar, and I keep this simple on purpose. This is just a simple HTTP listener on port 80, which will provision us a gateway. We've done this before. And then we proceed to deploy two sets of workloads, two distinct namespaces. There's the reviews service. So we'll create a reviews namespace, and then we'll deploy the reviews service to that namespace. And the reviews service, some versions thereof are dependent on the rating service, so we'll go ahead and deploy the rating service as well. Now, in a separate namespace, the details namespace will deploy the details service. So we can look real quick at the pods in the reviews namespace and the pods in the details namespace. There we go. So everything's been deployed, but we haven't configured routes yet. And the way we're going to do it is again with parent and child. And so we look at this parent again. This is the same one we looked at in the slides. It binds to our gateway. It has two backend refs, but sort of separates the jurisdiction, right? The API reviews path prefix will then be delegated to routes that we define in the reviews namespace, and the same thing for the details service with respect to the API/details path prefix. So we apply this parent route, which is incomplete, right? And we've got to build the child routes to, in a sense, to define the final routing portion to the actual backend services. And so if we look at the reviews route, we can see here that the rules for the reviews route, this is going to be defined in the reviews namespace. It has the same path prefix we have in the parent route. And since the endpoint itself on the service is /reviews, not /API reviews, we use the URL rewrite filter. But then we finally, here we see the backend ref of reviews service is the final sort of destination for this particular request. So we can apply this particular child route. We'll do the same thing with the details route. This is very similar, except that it's concerned with the API/details endpoint, which will route to the details service as we see here in this example. So now we've sort of stitched everything together. Let's test it. Let's go ahead and grab our gateway IP address, send in a curl request, maybe first to the reviews endpoint, and see if the request is actually functioning as expected. And indeed it does. And we can do the same thing for the details endpoint. It looks like a single API, but it's really apportioned to two separate services, and the routes are kept separate, each maintained by a different API team. And that was the goal of the exercise, and indeed of the feature, the route delegation feature. So let's go ahead and sum things up. Some other things you should know about route delegation is it doesn't stop with this simple example. There are more elaborate configurations that we can explore, including hierarchies of route delegation. Child routes also have some optional stanzas, such as a parent ref, if we want to constrain who the parent can be in terms of merging all of these routes together into one. The route delegation is obviously something that's particularly valuable in large enterprise environments where you have a sort of a hierarchy of routing rules with many teams. And to learn more about it, of course, it's documented on the kgateway documentation website, which I invite you to go to and explore further. There's some examples illustrated here and additional information that we didn't cover in this lesson. And so that concludes the lesson. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in an upcoming lesson. Bye.